Hello there and welcome to the 927th episode of Radio Free Nintendo. This is Greg sitting in for James as host this week as we record on the 29th of May 2025, less than a week now out from the launch of Switch 2. But yes, we are without James and indeed without John as they're still travelling and whatnot. But you'll be glad to know that this will not be some sort of Gollum type soliloquy from me for the entire episode, because I am joined by our usual Guillaume Villette.
What's left of him anyway? I'm a little bit sick, and so I might have the Gollum voice accidentally here and there. We'll see.
But also, very good to join us on the eve of this major occasion in the history of Nintendo is our long-time contributor and indeed long-time host. At least with me, I think this is the first time we've recorded together in 2 years. It's Johnny Metz.
Oh yeah, well, thank you guys very much for having me. Yeah, it has been a long time since I was on the show. I'm excited and honored to be here tonight. And I like Guy, I also have a fever, and the only solution is Switch 2.
God.
You knew it was going. I mean, it had to be something. But I mean, if I'm not mistaken, because it was a memorable episode, a couple of years ago, I believe we were right on the cusp of Tears of the Kingdom. The last time I recorded with you, Johnny.
Oh my gosh.
And it was the time that James and I had both finished Future Redeemed, the DLC for Xenoblade 3. And we was, we'll have a quick, coda to the episode, just talking about that. And then that went on for about like an hour and 20 minutes or something after the two of you, retired. So that episode was like nearly 4 hours long. So it's good to have, my memory is, not what it used to be, or at least I don't think it is. But that one is difficult to forget for multiple reasons. Just the fact I was recording with you again, and then it was about 9 a.m. by the time I wrapped up.
Oh my gosh,
it was absolutely ridiculous. But yes, a pleasure to have you back on, Johnny. And indeed, we are right, on the cusp of the first new bit of Switch Nintendo hardware for over 8 years. In the past we haven't had to wait that long between Nintendo hardware launches because of the two product lines, handheld and just dedicated console and all. So it's a pretty big deal, and one of the things that we're going to try and do ahead of that is to look at some of the emails that have kind of came in over the past several weeks after the Switch 2 Direct and all the reveals and the various kind of details came out about how things are going to be with the new system, and try and address as many of those that really feel like they would be best addressed in the spirit that they were sent in anticipation of the system coming out, rather than, the reality of it having already hit the market, in the listener mail coming up later in the show. So that's definitely, where we want to kind of direct most of our attention here. But of course, coming to us for the first time in such a long time, Johnny, it would be remiss if we weren't be able to catch up with some of the things you've been up to, playing games and whatnot. So I would be delighted if you could get us started on new business.
Well, sure, thanks. So one of the Switch games I've been playing lately, which it hasn't been a lot for Switch. It's become sort of like a bathroom game system for me. It's like, I end up playing just a few minutes a day. And I don't want to buy a bunch of Switch games right now. Like, if a cool new game comes out, my Switch is now almost 7.5 years old, more than 7 years old, I guess. And, I just don't want to play it on that. No, 8 years old, right? Switch is 8 years old. So I don't necessarily want to play
8 and 3 months, basically, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I just can't count anymore. But yeah, my launch Switch.
No, well, I was wondering. I couldn't remember if you had one at launch or not. But I would have imagined so.
Yeah, yeah. My wife and I actually both got Switches on launch day, and we were in a long distance relationship at the time. Had not been dating that long. And so we were playing Breath of the Wild every day and talking to each other about it. And then when we visit each other, we play Breath of the Wild, with each other and marvel at the places that the other had found and the ways they had solved things, that we hadn't ourselves thought to try. So it was a very memorable time in my life. That's the Switch launch.
And to think you manage that without game chat. I mean, really, that absolutely indispensable feature that will be gracing us on Switch too. I don't even know what point I'm trying to make with that.
It would have been fun, to,
sure.
But that's not the kind of game I don't think that would have supported game chat for, I guess you can stream your screen out to other Switch 2 people and they can just look at that regardless of whether they're playing a game. I think that's the way it works. So I guess that would have been very handy.
Yeah, or like playing different games, right? Like it doesn't, some of the footage they show, it's like, sometimes it's of everyone playing the same thing at once. Whether it's like literally something that would, actually support that many players or not. It's like, oh, well, we're all playing the same game, like comparing experiences, even if it's not like a multiplayer thing. But then other times they show footage of just like, you're off playing some completely different title, but you can, see what somebody else is doing in a different game. So yeah, I get, we're all going to have to see how well stuff like that holds up and functions in practice, but that's the idea, isn't it? Is to kind of enrich and facilitate the kind of experience that you're actually talking about there back in 17.
Right, yeah. And I think I like the concept of the Switch 2 being a kind of a social hub where you can hang out and talk to your friends and family even if you're playing different games. That's something that I think we've kind of wanted since back in the Nintendo voice chat days, back in the 2000s, where we were kept wishing that they would provide some way for us to communicate. And it's like, yeah, we've all got phones, but we'd like to do it through the game system and even indeed through the games, because that's what we're doing. And we want to be able to play games together. And I like the idea that you could even do it while you're playing different games. And I don't know that I saw this in the Treehouse Live thing. I might have missed it. But I'd be interested if you can also just literally watch someone else's game stream full screen on your own Switch 2 and not even be playing a game, but just sort of watching as a spectator while someone else is playing their Switch 2 game. I would think that's possible if you can have a picture-in-picture, while you're playing a completely different game. You should just be able to just, watch the video playback. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm intrigued by some of those features.
If they did allow you to do that, would they allow you to run it at a higher refresh rate at that point? Because obviously the whole thing is like, the feed's like a cut, into a low refresh rate to manage the amount of load, going on there. But especially because, so some of this stuff is showing like, 4 other people's feeds at once or whatever. But yeah, if you were like, no, I want to like concentrate on somebody else's at larger scale, it would be nice if it could be a lot smoother as well, because otherwise it's one thing, to have the choppier looking feeds when they're small down there and you just kind of glimpse in them while you're playing yourself. But if you're dedicating your full attention to it, you'd think you'd want it better, basically. So yeah, I'm not sure I've seen, and I will confess I've not religiously followed every update that relates to game chat myself, but I'm not sure we've seen anything that demonstrates that particular kind of functionality at this point. Yeah.
Well, I guess more on those kinds of features later in the show, but what I have been playing on my Switch 1 lately is Etrian Odyssey III. It is the first Etrian Odyssey game I've played other than, I think, a demo for 4, because that was on 3DS and it was easy to download a demo for it. And I enjoyed the demo, but, never did buy the game. And so I got the HD remaster of Etrian Odyssey 3 when it was on a deep discounted sale, several months ago. And, I just it seemed from best I could tell if I was only going to play one of these first 3 games that they remastered, 3 is the most advanced one. I would probably get the most enjoyment out of it. And the stories, such as they are not really connected from one game to the other as far as I can tell. So that was not a problem jumping in at number 3. So I went for that, and the first couple hours of the game were very much like the demo I'd played for 4. And so I can already kind of tell that each of these games is a hell of a lot like the other, as the series goes on. And so, I'm not sure how much I have to say about this one will really be that specific to number 3. But it's my first one. So what I could tell you is it's a pretty traditional, pretty basic Japanese RPG in that, you have, a party of 5 characters that you recruit, from different job classes, and you name them all. They don't have any dialogue. They don't have any personality. They're not real characters. They're just, people they're soldiers that you recruit into your little party. And, the skills, there are skill trees that you can go through as you level up these characters in battle. And some of the skills are interesting, but they take a long time to level up to the point where they get interesting. And the battle system is turn-based, and you don't see your own characters, so it's like a classic Dragon Quest type first-person view where you only see the monsters and your characters are just names at the bottom of the screen. And those battles I have found to be really the weak point of the game and not that interesting. I mean, it's stuff I've seen in literally hundreds of other video games that I've played, and this just seems like a kind of a basic subpar version of it. The only time I've enjoyed the battles is when they interact a little bit with the exploration and sort of the navigation of these dungeons that you're crawling around in. And so, that's definitely the thing the series is known for, since it has basic combat and practically no story, at least in these versions. You're walking around this 3-dimensional space, one grid square at a time, and you're turning, or you can, strafe left and right to navigate these things, and you're making a map as you go. Now I have been playing it with all the auto map features turned on. That's especially because I'm doing this on Switch. I don't want to be fiddling with the touch screen all the time because I don't have a stylus handy most of the time. And the part of the map that you draw on is a very small part of the screen, and I have big fingertips. So it's very difficult, to do exactly what you want on the map with the fingertip. And so I can usually get what I want done, but it's very frequent that I make a mistake and have to use the undo or the trash can symbol or whatever, and, fix a mistake. That's just purely due to, dexterity or, the lack of sensitivity or whatever. So the touchscreen controls for mapping in the Switch version here are not great. You can also use button controls, like D-pad and buttons to do some of the map stuff. That is easier for certain things, and I think it's harder for certain other things. So you might develop your own style of mixing and matching the 2 input methods, to kind of get what you want. But it's all fiddly and complex enough on the Switch that I decided I wanted to do less of it than the maximum. So that's why I turned on all the auto map stuff. And even with all the auto mapping stuff turned on, there's still quite a bit of annotations that you have to provide, while you're exploring. So if you find a treasure chest, if you find, a secret passageway through the wall, if you find a character, none of that is going to be automatically added to the map. So even with all the auto stuff turned on, you still have to do that manually. And that's okay. I was prepared for that kind of thing because that's what this game is. And that stuff is mostly just dragging symbols onto the grid is itself pretty simple, to do with your fingertip. So that wasn't a problem. So anyway, it's pretty easy to play this and think, yeah, this was probably a better experience on the DS or the 3DS when you had a dedicated touchscreen and you could sort of control your character, and still be holding a stylus and ready to do things on the map as you are moving around the dungeons. But for me, the random battles, they just pull you out of that stuff a little too often. They're not super, super frequent, but they're not uncommon either, the battles. And so they interrupt you doing all your mapping stuff, and it's fairly easy to kind of forget where you were heading or what you were intending to do, by the time those battles are over. And the other kind of issue I take with Etrian Odyssey 3 is that the progression through it just feels very slow. It's very grindy. You don't get a whole lot of experience from fighting these long battles. You make very little money when you find items and you collect monster parts and stuff, basically, and then you'll get paid back in town after you leave the dungeon. And it just never feels like you make very much progress toward buying the next piece of equipment or something like that, or getting the next skill unlocked. That it just seems like everything takes forever. So I played 25 hours of it, made it down to level 9 or 10, I think level 9 of the dungeon, which is toward the end of the second set of the second stratum of 5 levels. Every 5 levels, the environment changes. So you get a really nice graphical change up, and it feels like you're in a new part of the game. It's very exciting. And then there's 5 levels of that all look exactly the same. Yeah, I think I just kind of reached a point where I felt like, well, I've seen what this game does, and it's just going to be more of this for the next 80 hours. And I'm not motivated to continue, honestly, especially without much of a grander story. There's no character arc at all for anybody. The missions are not very interesting, and it just takes way too long to make progress. So I've kind of fallen off of it. I do want to say the boat part of Etrian Odyssey 3 is very cool. And I gather that this might be only in this one game, because I remember the demo for 4 had an airship that was similar, but more 3-dimensional. You can move up and down in altitude, as well. Mm-hmm. But the boat, is obviously a bit simpler. You're just on the surface of the water, but still, it basically controls like you're crawling around the dungeon. So it feels like a very similar interface. You still have the map. You're making a map in the same way, but there are no random battles. And it's much more about navigating, like one-way currents that you encounter through the water that will push you off in a direction you might not want to go to. So getting around that stuff and finding a route to some interesting place that's often on the horizon that you can kind of see. But you're very limited in how far you can go. You can only move a certain number of spaces before you run out of food. That can be upgraded. And so you're encouraged to go stop at these little islands that you might find along the way. Even though that's not really your destination, you might find something interesting there that lets you upgrade the ship or learn something new that will help you in these larger quests. And so at a certain point, maybe 10, 15 hours into the game, all of a sudden it felt like I was making more progress in the boat side mission stuff than I was in the main part of the game where you're going into the dungeon. And so I started really focusing on the boats, and I really enjoyed that for a while. But you kind of reach a point in the ocean exploration where the next phase of things to do are really far away from the city where you start. You always start at the same place, and you go out as far as you can until you run out of moves, and then you're done. And you have to pay a little bit of money to go out the next time. Well, the items that let you stay out on the ocean longer and do more exploring and find cooler stuff that you haven't seen before, those get extremely expensive to take with you. And so after a while, I kind of found that I couldn't actually play the boat part of the game anymore without going and grinding a bunch of money out of the dungeon, which again takes forever because you don't actually get much money from killing monsters. So it's interesting how these sort of two modes of the game play off of each other and affect each other. But ultimately, the part of the game that I found the most interesting is the one that is the most gated off and constrained, and I just didn't want to go and do more of the random battles just so I could explore a little bit more of the ocean. But overall, interesting experience. I definitely learned a lot about the Etrian Odyssey franchise and kind of scratched my curiosity for what those games are about. So I would recommend it on that front. You might click with it more than I have. you've played. Haven't you played some of these? I kind of remember you talking about them in the past.
Yeah, Etrian Odyssey III is, I haven't played that one, and I haven't played 2 either. I've played Untold, the first one, but I played it in the, kind of the remake mode. Not the remake mode, but rather the classic mode of the remake. So it would have had many of the gameplay improvements that kind of started with 4, but I did not play the new story. That's more of a, the characters are actually characters and not just, swords for hire. I'm interested in playing it, but I gotta say, like, I think I would be more likely maybe to try to order a cartridge of the DS version than trying to play on the Switch. But then again, I've got so many of these games that I probably don't need to go back to 3. So it's been on my wish list forever, but I'm kind of exploring other RPGs right now. But yeah, I don't know. Like I still found, the Gollum voice is coming out now. Sorry. I still found the combat in Etrian Odyssey interesting because I have not grown up with dungeon crawlers, which is what this is, right? It's kind of like its own subset of RPG, directly from wizardry, where, like you're trying to build the ultimate party that will get you through floor after floor of traps and monsters and bosses. And so I found it interesting in that sense, okay, I'm playing a modern version of one of the, like, prototypical genres. And I'm thankful that I can just draw on the map on the screen here, and I don't have to have, lined paper to make my own paper maps on. So like in that sense, like I felt like, okay, I'm exploring kind of a classic video game genre, but like with a level of hand-holding of kind of modern niceties that I kind of expect at this point and probably wouldn't want to go without. So I don't know. I don't see myself, I guess, trying the Etrian Odyssey games on the Switch, which is too bad because I don't know. Like, I guess I'm just gonna wait for another dual screen Nintendo Portable for
any day now.
For Etrian Odyssey sequels and remakes and all of that. Like,
touchscreen is not the only method of input that might suffice here. So I think like pointer controls on Switch 2 could feasibly work very nicely for something like this. But I would say that
you mention it,
Switch 1 is probably not the ideal platform for Etrian Odyssey. Like a 3DS is probably the best system you could do this on.
Sure. And now that you mention it, like, I haven't really looked into the whole, like, Zelda notes thing that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are gonna get. But I kind of, like, if Nintendo's doing that and if people actually enjoy it and it kind of works, who knows if Atlus is not going to try to bring some Etrian Odyssey game on the Switch 2 and have their own Zelda notes, their own dungeon crawler notes where, sure, you're playing on the TV or on your Switch, you're exploring. I guess this only works in the setting where you're actually, playing on your TV, because then if you're juggling like a tablet and a Switch at the same time, that on the bus or the train,
tabletop mode, maybe.
Yeah, well, I hope you like getting mugged. But maybe something like some sort of setup like that could be cool at home in the safety of your own home.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Sorry, I was just going to say, my only experience with these sorts of games was actually the second Persona Q game, which is fundamentally very similar. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I do wonder if one of the things maybe it helped with, based on compared to what Johnny talked about, is like the battle encounters maybe being a little bit more interesting because it's got that whole like press turn thing from Shin Megami Tensei. in there, you know, with the different elemental like weaknesses, and then if you hit the weaknesses, you get extra actions and all that. And maybe that might have like sped up, you know, if you manipulate that to your advantage, you know, it's kind of speeds up how fast the battles can go, and whether that just added a little something, because you know, it's not exactly the sort of thing that I'm naturally kind of given to, you know, kind of you know, quite a traditional tradition amongst the RPG kind of spectrum that I'm not really familiar with in terms of the dungeon crawler aspect of it, and you know, the making your own map aspect of it. But you know, with the right balance of the convenience of that bottom screen to, you know, do a lot of the mapping with, you know, a certain amount of automatic elements to it and all that, it just hit that right kind of sweet spot of feeling like you were mapping it yourself. There was this active element, but it wasn't overly fiddly, which again, you know, based on what you're saying, Johnny, is it kind of says like you're more likely to get into that fiddly realm with the Switch stuff unless you automate it a lot, right? That's, you know, kind of basically what you're saying. So it does sound like it's, you know, not necessarily, there's some compromises there, but equally, you know, it's kind of nice they're willing to, you know, kind of make those to keep it, you know, to keep the series out there, because it was pretty much a mainstay, but you know what I mean? It was a consistent presence on DS and 3DS for quite a number of years, and clearly it was always going to be a challenge once that age of hardware came to an end. You know, how do they, you know, kind of try and make that transition? And I don't know whether it's fair to say they did everything they could with these releases, but yeah, maybe Switch 2 offers them more scope to actually, you know, do some other things, some other accommodations that might not be perfect compensation, but it might work a little bit better with the mouse stuff or something. We'll see.
I hope we'll give it a try on the new system. But I do look forward to, I think the mouse controls open up an interesting possibility space for, you know, for the DS paradigm of, you know, a game that you might control at least partially with, like a pointer type input method. And I think the mouse has a lot of good potential to be something like that, where you could still use it even while playing on a TV, which really doesn't work with a touchscreen.
Yep, and are there any other items of new business you'd like to discuss, Johnny, before we move on?
Yeah, I want to give just a quick little bit of love to a game called South of Midnight. It's a Microsoft game, and it's not currently on Switch, but would not be surprised to see it announced for Switch 2 at some point in the future. That Microsoft seems to be heading that direction where that would be completely possible. So I think we'll find out, but it's one of the just like most creatively satisfying games I've played in a while, where you can see that they had a really strong vision for the setting and the characters and the story and the kind of thematic elements they wanted to have in the story here, and they really pulled that off in a really impressive way that I don't see a lot of other games going for. So South of Midnight is basically a 3D character action type game. I would say it's the kind of the skeleton of how the game plays is pretty familiar, and is the kind of thing you might expect out of like a licensed character game, or something like that. So you can run around, you can jump, there's a little bit of platforming, there are points in the environment where you can grapple and sort of, you know, launch yourself toward it. It's all very baked in. There are very specific places they want to allow you to do these kinds of things. And there's a fair bit of chase gameplay, at certain points in the story where, they will set up a little bit like a Crash Bandicoot type of like, or, you know, like a very linear type of track that's mostly just straightforward, that you're running down this track going straight forward, and it's fast paced, and you only have a second or two to figure out, you know, do I jump here, or do I slide here, or do I punch through the wall, or, you know, use whatever abilities that your character has. But It's like, honestly, it's a little bit like Uncharted Light, you might say. Sometimes you climb on a cliff wall, or you climb up the side of a building and you look for handholds, but it's all pretty simple stuff. And what really makes South of Midnight stand out is the art style. Definitely very cool, really interesting earthy color palette, You start in it. So the game is set in like the Louisiana, Mississippi bayou, like sort of around the Mississippi Delta. And the story, the characters, are generally drawn from like folklore in that part of the United States, which is just not something that many video games have ever touched. So it's already like on a really good, starting point in terms of providing something that just feels new. And that really drew me to it. And you play as this young woman I think she's meant to be probably like a senior in high school, or maybe, like an early college age. And she lives with her mom. Her father's dead. And at the beginning of the story, she's just coming home from school or from work, and she's looking for her mom. And, they have a quick chat, and then there's a hurricane outside. And so it's like, okay, go check on the neighbors during the storm. You go check on the neighbors, you come back to your house after a few minutes, and that right as you come up to the house, the storm blows the house away with your mother in it. And so then you spend most of the game after that chasing after the house, which is like drifting down river, in the flood. And you're chasing after the house, looking for your mom, trying to find out if she's still alive, if she's safe. And along the way, as you get farther and farther from the community where you live, and you get farther down the river, you sort of start transitioning into a more mythological environment. And it's still very like bayou based, and, it's very swampy looking and very hot, and very rural. But, you start to see more creatures that are magical, and little elements in the environment that don't seem right, and more these kind of strands of fabric or silk or something that are hanging in the air. And you learn that your character has inherited magical powers, from a long line of people they call stitchers. And so she gets these sort of giant sewing utensils basically, and uses them for combat, and uses them, to do some magical stuff in the environment. And from there, it's just a sort of a series of basically levels. It's not like one big open world or anything. It's set up in chapters and levels that are fairly straightforward, with a number of branching off points where you can go get secret stuff that's optional. But mostly it's you encountering these places, encountering these little side characters who have some kind of trauma in their past. And as you explore the environment, and go look for things, you find, sources of sort of like dark energy, here and there that relate to this person that you just ran into. And you start learning more about their background. And invariably what happens is you find out that this person you ran into, who was maybe kind of rude to you, or maybe just, had some kind of interesting, quirky personality. Oh, it turns out they've got this long history with a lot of very dark, tragic things that happen to them. A lot of times it's family oriented, like some sibling died or was accidentally killed. Or, the parents split up and one of them was abusive and things like that. I mean, some of the subject matter is pretty dark, and I think, addresses just like very, very believable family drama and personal trauma that might cause you to become very cynical, very bitter in your older age, or very withdrawn. And this is the kind of thing that South of Midnight is interested in exploring. So it's psychological, and it's interested in like, how did these people get to be this way and what's going on with them? And so, you fight a few battles and you find a few, magical spots in the world, and it plays a little scene, and you learn a little bit more about these people until eventually you try to address what's going on with them head on, whether that's by some kind of boss battle or like an environmental puzzle or something, some kind of culminating event that will kind of conclude that chapter. And of course, all this eventually leads to you doing the same kind of cycle that I just described, but for the main character, for the protagonist. So as you go along, you're learning more about her own history, her family members who are still around, those who are gone, and her relationships with them, and what's really going on with her. And so eventually she has to deal with her own stuff. It's a really interesting game. It's only 10 or 12 hours long, so it's not like a huge commitment to see this story play through. It is not that difficult. The combat occasionally can be a little frustrating, but I think you can turn that down too. That is certainly not the most interesting part of the game, so I wouldn't feel bad about doing that. I was really glad that I played it. I like the music a lot. I think a lot of the score of the game that plays dynamically while you're in the environments, it is really well rooted in the rural South and the various different musical traditions. Most of American music can be traced back to some part of the South and to that particular part of the region even. And so you get this really nice variety of country and blues and bluegrass and folk music and all kinds of stuff like that that's mixed together in this score and instruments and styles that you don't often hear in video games. So I really enjoyed that. I will say each of the sort of main characters of each chapter, of the major chapters, they have their own bespoke song that's original in the game that's about them, which kind of is made to sound like a folk song, but it's written for the game. There must be 6 or 8 of them. I don't think they're great. I think they're very explicit and literal about what's happening to these characters, which makes them redundant with the little cinema scenes that you're earning as you play through the game. And also to me, they sound like they were done by a different creative force or a different team than the score. And they don't sound as authentic to the region of the US, that the game is set. They're not as good. And so I don't love the songs in the game, but I would say in general, I do love the music in the game. So that's kind of a strange takeaway, I guess. But for the most part, yeah, I think it's quite a lovely game. And I like the characters a lot. And I felt good about it. It has a weird conclusion, a little bit anticlimactic, I thought, to the grand story. Feels a little bit like something got cut toward the end of development and maybe they had to push the game out a little bit. But it's not like a big cliffhanger or anything. It's a bit deflating. It's not quite the big, payoff that you might expect. But overall, really glad I played it, and I haven't heard many people talk about it, so I kind of felt like I should bring it up here and put it on some radar.
Yeah, I played the very beginning of it, but I'm playing other games at the moment, so I kind of put it on the back burner, but I'm interested. It's made by a Montreal studio, but, what does that mean exactly? Like, it's mostly that a studio established itself here to, benefit from the government credits, the tax credits. So, I'm pretty sure that probably a lot of authentically, American, like Southern American developers, are in the team. Like, from what I understand, like it's very, it feels authentic, so I'm kind of interested.
I think so. I think they had, at least some very good consultants and probably, and I haven't looked into it myself, but I'm going to say the writers of the game, some of the main producers I would expect are from that part of the country and know what they're talking about. You get that sense from playing it, definitely.
It's true that I haven't heard a lot said about the actual game, but unfortunately, I'm online, and so I've seen a lot of kind of talk around the game or stuff that's happening around the game, and some of it is not good. Like there's a games journalist who is being kind of dogpiled by Gamergate 2, and she spoke about the game, and they're mocking her and they're mocking the game because, for reasons. So that's going on. But the stuff that I hear about the actual game itself is actually really cool. Like how the team, the studio is basically next door to this stop motion, movie studio. And so, like, they kind of, like, checked out, like, what each other, like, hey, this is the game we're working on, and, like, this is the movie we're working on, and, like, the people at the studio were like, oh, that looks so cool. We need to make our game kind of look like that. And so, like, the kind of the stop motion quality to the cutscenes is basically where that's from, you know?
Yeah. Just and it's not even just in this cutscenes. It's like the mythological elements and characters in the game. Those show up as stop motion, whereas other things, including your main character, do not. So it can look pretty strange when they are next to each other. It's like a Roger Rabbit situation, almost like, whoa, those are like very different animation styles, you know, clashing a little bit. They're not totally different, but it's noticeable that there's something different, and it's intentional.
Yeah, and at the same time, you know, people have experienced, you know, Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse and stuff like that. So, you know, that probably prepared us to see like this, you know, okay, human and claymation next to each other. That's, right. You know, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's not the same frame of animation, you know, like their own, like whatever it is, technically, like it looks weird, but you get over it.
Yeah, it wasn't a problem for me.
Oh, it's intriguing stuff. I guess we're all waiting to see just how much the floodgates are going to open from the Microsoft studios to other platforms, and Nintendo in particular, once Switch 2, you know, presumably it'd be a bit more of a, you know, kind of feasible destination for. So, I mean, things have already, you know, arrived on Switch, you know, like Pentiment and stuff, right? But
right, but and like Pentiment was a Microsoft studio. You know, but Compulsion Games is not owned by Microsoft. Microsoft just published a game. So let's hope that this is more of a, you know, Ori kind of scenario where like those were some of the earlier Microsoft associated games that came to the Switch. So hopefully, like, yeah, maybe we'll get this sooner rather than later.
Yes, it seems plausible on that basis, as you said, although it does also feel like we're entering a bit of a different phase of Microsoft's participation in the video game market. I mean, those price increases for the consoles, it does, when they're obviously already, you know, woefully behind the PS5 in market share, it does rather feel like they you know, they have no interest in attempting to erode that disparity. It seems like it's going to be much more about, I mean, the often cited on this program, you know, everything's an Xbox thing, and just finding more ways for people to play all these games that they control with their vast, you know, kind of empire of studios and things they license and publish, rather than trying to leverage exclusive so much. And with Switch 2 entering the market, you would think it would be something that they'd want to you know, dip their toe in at the very least and see how successful, you know, some of the games can be on there. But thanks a lot, Johnny, for sharing, you know, what you've been up to games-wise. And Guillaume, obviously, it's been a few weeks, you know, since you've been on. All of us, we actually had a couple of weeks off for a change in the build-up to the new console launch. Have you got anything you'd like to share before we get on with the pre-Switch 2 stuff?
Yeah, I mean, like, I've been pretty busy in general, and then I felt sick, and I just haven't felt like jumping back into Final Fantasy VI, unfortunately, so I haven't really made any progress in that, but I did pick up here and there a few games. The first one, Trip World, which Trip World DX, the Switch version. So you've talked about this game before, Craig, because you had an import 3DS, right, that let you download the Game Boy ROM. It might
have just been on the European shop, this one. I can't remember. That doesn't mean I didn't play it on my Japanese because I also had one of those. But it might have just been that reflecting the fact that I think it did come out in Europe in some fashion originally. But I've had it. Yeah, certainly it's been a long time though since I've really dealt with it.
Right, and it's one of those almost like mythical games just because it looks very good. It didn't come to North America. And so, like, that combination of factors seems to have made it kind of a, like one of those, like, lost gems kind of titles. Or at least that's how I perceived it. So I didn't even really interrogate that. Like, I was just looking for a good sale on the title, and I was like, yeah, of course I'm going to play this at some point. And now that I have, I gotta say, it left me a little bit, not that impressed, Turns out that it is a very good-looking game, but I found that there was so little to it. It's kind of off-putting because it's, I've seen this game kind of put like side by side with Gimmick. Is it like the same developer?
I think there might be some overlap there, right? I mean, it's Sunsoft, yeah? Is that right?
Right. So they're both Sunsoft. So I don't know what I expected. Like maybe something that was like really hard to master, or that offered some challenge. But
Gimmick is certainly quite famous for that, right? I remember we had the request in for the ending music from Gimmick, and it referenced that it was famous for that. But I guess with Trip World originally being a Game Boy game as opposed to a sort of late Famicom game, I don't know whether that really is that really what informed the kind of the presumed audience kind of shifted their approach maybe with making that.
I don't know, but like in my brain I just conflated the two basically, like, these two late to the party on their respective hardwares games from Sunsoft. Like I think maybe I mixed them up a little bit in my head. So maybe my expectations for Trip World were not in line with what the game actually is, which is a very nice looking Game Boy game, but it's like clearly meant for children. Most of the enemies, quote unquote, in the game don't actually directly hurt you. It's only in certain instances when, like, if they hit you head on, like, or if, like, you can see that they've got an aggressive demeanor. It's been a few weeks now that I played it, so I don't remember exactly, but I think like they've got a flower in their heads if they're evil or something. But yeah, like otherwise, yeah, like they're creatures that are there, and you could, I guess, try to kick them to death, but you don't have to. First, you probably don't want to because the range of your kick is extremely limited, so it's kind of a very fiddly attack. But also, yeah, there's no penalty for just going past them. You just jump over them, and then you go to the next screen, and then the next screen, and that's one of the things about the game, like the number of just empty screens with only one way forward and not really anything of note in them just feels very strange. Like it's a very sparsely populated game. So very few enemies, and the enemies that are there, most of them you can ignore. There is a points, like the points counter. I think I noticed that when I killed quote unquote enemies, like it didn't go up. So I don't actually even know like why sometimes I would get points for certain actions and sometimes I wouldn't. And I kind of briefly looked it up online. I didn't really find a good answer or like anything interesting about it. So I just, I didn't insist. The gimmick, what am I saying? Trip, I guess, is the main character. I'm going to assume it is. So he's got transformations. Some of them are activated by a power-up that you find, and those are timed transformations. So, like, he can get, like, a long tail, and so that's going to become your attack. And so you're going to be able to attack enemies from more than just, like, directly in their face. Like, you can have, like, a space between you and the enemies, so that's good to have. I forget what the other power-up is. But you've also got two other transformations that you can access at any time. If you press down and the attack button, you turn into a fish. Now, if you do that on the ground, you're just gonna, flop and not be able to move. So thankfully, you can just like revert back to your kind of default rabbit form. And when you press up and the attack button, then you transform into, like your ears become basically wings. And so you can just keep mashing the jump button to soar. But you kind of immediately lose your ability to keep to stay in the air as soon as you touch a wall or a ceiling. So, and you kind of, as you go up, like you kind of move forward at the same time. So there's no, you're going to hit a wall at some point. Like you can't go multiple screens just flying over the levels. Like that's not really a thing. And so like this is a mechanic that's way more limited than, certainly like Mario Escape and Super Mario World. Like there's not that many secrets that you can reach with this flight mechanic. There are a couple of places where maybe like you can take a branching path and you might get a different power up and see a different enemy if you go up and instead of going right. But I think that happens like 2 or 3 times in the game. There are like 6 worlds or 5 or 6. It's over very quickly. And so, yeah, the whole thing was, I don't know, it's not going to stay in my mind at all. Like there was no, I still feel like this is a very good looking Game Boy game. This is an experience and a conclusion that I could have come to just by watching, YouTube. So it's not exactly a game I can recommend.
It sounds a lot like Kirby's Dream Land, and I guess listening to you describe Trip World, it makes me appreciate that even though, we love to talk about how easy Kirby games tend to be, and certainly the original on Game Boy is no exception to that, but I do like how Kirby's powers and the level designs, they require you to interact with the enemies. The enemies are there as not just obstacles, which sounds like they're not even much of obstacles in Trip World, but certainly in Kirby they can be, but they're also tools to get through blocks and to blow things up and to find secrets and so yeah, I guess I should give Kirby a little bit more credit for the sophistication of
that's
its
the
design.
thing though, isn't it? Kirby's Adventure having a copy, that's why was such a big deal.
That's a huge leap
for the NES game. I played the original Kirby's Dream Land on NSO. That was the first time I played it, and it's a very kind of brisk romp, because it doesn't put up much resistance. It's a bit of fun, and it's kind of impressive some of the things it was doing with the Game Boy hardware in terms of how much kind of cuteness they could get out of it and stuff. But yeah, I feel like that hitting on that where it's like, well, we're not actually making it that much harder, but we're giving you a reason to bother with the enemies and making it so that they, give you these things that are just fun to play around with, but they also, we can set up these particular scenarios that are built around the abilities, of being able to go really fast as a fireball or, all this kind of stuff, like the different mobility that it gives you, and some of these elemental things, little puzzle type things like that. That was a huge breakthrough and really, is what gave the kind of sustainability to the Kirby franchise. And it doesn't really sound like these kind of abilities that you have, where you like the flying ears or you turn into the fish, really quite substitute for that in Trip World.
Yeah, so in addition to Trip World, just by coincidence, more Game Boy games showed up on the NSO Nintendo Classics. I played some of those. So we got, what was it? A Gradius game, the Interstellar Assault. Kirby's Star
which is
Stack.
the second. That's the second game in the series. But the first one has not been put on NSO, which I guess is, it's somewhat in keeping with what they're doing, Konami have done, because we got the third Castlevania game with not the first two, but then those two were in a collection. They were in the Castlevania collection that preceded like the Metroidvania ones or whatever. So in this case, you kind of wonder like, are they ever going to do anything with that first one? But yeah, I don't know. Maybe they just felt like this was the better one. Certainly, in the case of those Castlevania games, the second one was a lot better than the first one. I don't know that the disparity is that sharp in this case, but maybe they just felt like, look, this is the better one, we'll just put that there.
Right. Well, okay. I might as well talk about it very quickly then. So I did play through that game, and it was interesting that, I don't think I haven't played all the Gradius games, but I've played a lot of them, and including Gradius 5, I think it was called on the PlayStation 2. That's the
treasure
that
one.
was the last big one. Right. And it was from what I recall, it was very good. It was they kind of were like, okay, well, this might be the last one of these. Let's do everything we want to do with it. But this one is interesting because it's the first and only Gradius game that I can think of that's actually kind of telling a story as you're playing through it.
Because it's interesting, isn't it? That on the Game Boy, it feels like it feels more of a responsibility to have a consistent scenario, to say okay, now you've been sort of captured by a tractor beam thing, and you're being dragged inside this kind of craft, and then you're going to blast your way out, and then now you're burning up in the atmosphere because you're going down into another planet. You don't really tend to get that in the even with the higher fidelity of the arcade games and their console ports. A lot of the time it was just no, it's very kind of set progression of you have the Starfield bit before the level kind of begins in earnest, where you get the formations of enemies that you have to kill all of them to get your power-up things.
But even there, even before that, the game starts you with a, kind of a normal cutscene where you see your ship amongst much bigger battle cruisers or whatever. The enemies show up. The battle cruisers crash down. You're the only survivor. Then you get chased by this giant boss, Gradius boss. But so now from this point on, the game is playable. So you're just escaping this boss that's coming from the left of the screen. You're just dodging asteroids. You can't even really shoot them down. You can't really do anything. But in your escape, you enter some caves. Eventually the boss is too big the rock too solid for the boss to keep crashing through the rock. So it, you escape it that way. You're just now in the cave. So that's the reason why you're in the caves in your spaceship. I haven't, it's so weird because it's such a classic Gradius thing where you're in the caves in your spaceship. Why are you in the caves? They never felt
and you're
that part.
You're in wide open space, and then the cave just emerges with still space in the background, and then you're out of it and you're into bubbles everywhere. It's
sure.
It has a kind of advantage of just hey, we'll just do whatever the hell we want. It's very abstract. It's whatever we feel like we want to have for level themes. But this does feel a little more, like you mentioned, Gradius 5, that had more of a kind of cinematic bent to it, and you had that whole time loop thing happening early on that it's kind of teasing, when you're fighting alongside another Vic Viper and all that, and so, it obviously is on this small scale, but it did remind me of that, and I just thought that's so kind of cute that they actually, went to the trouble of plotting out a more consistent scenario that you could actually trace from. And you can make, comparisons with earlier Konami games, the original Castlevania, I think is very good about that in terms of that feeling of they've got the little interstitial with the map of the castle, but also, the way you drop down into that sort of, the caverns with the underwater bit, and you climb back up, and you're seeing things like the clock tower in the background, and then you're there, and that. There was definitely some thought given to it in a game like that, but Gradius always just seemed more abstract and whatever it wanted to be, and so I feel like it's a nice touch. It's appreciated.
Yeah. So so it's fun to discover. So I would yeah, I would recommend people check that one if they're interested at all. The other game that I played, I did not try Survival Kids because it was more intimidating, I suppose. Maybe like at some point I'll check it out. And Kirby Star Stacker, we already have the SNES or the Super Famicom version on NSO, so I didn't feel the need to really spend that much time
you're
with
kind of sacrificing like the color graphics and the nicer music and all that for like the English menus. That's basically it.
Yeah. So I checked out The Sword of Hope. Now, The Sword of Hope 2 had been available on the 3DS Virtual Console, and I played a little bit of that a long time ago. I don't fully remember it, but from what I can remember, not a whole lot of evolution between Sword of Hope 2 and Sword of Hope 1, the first one, which is now what we got on NSO. So, The Sword of Hope, if you've... I don't even know how to explain this to people who are not as old as we are, but Kemco, the developer, they ported a trio of games that I see referred to as MacVenture games. So there was Shadowgate and Deja Vu and Uninvited. So those were like classic point-and-click Mac games that were ported to the NES by Kemco. And they all share this kind of first-person view. Like you can see, like, you know, if you're in a room, like you're going to see, like, here's the couch, here's the door, here's like whatever. And you've got a menu of like maybe 6 or 8 actions. Like you can open, you can hit, you can, maybe you've got an inventory. So you can select in your menu what you want to do. So, okay, I want to hit, and then you select in the next menu, okay, well, the sofa or the door or the person that's there. And that will give you, like that's how you progress through the game. And I just remember the only one of those I played as a kid was Deja Vu, and it always creeped me out. Because you could do stuff very early on as, okay, like you go in the bathroom, like you're locked, I think, at first in that first apartment, and you've got no memory of how you were there. You go to the bathroom. If you hit the mirror, it's like instant death, I believe, and you get like the skull face, like death is coming for you. And so like it was like they had a lot of atmosphere for a 7-year-old who didn't quite understand English in the first place. So like me and my friend, like we were just like playing through them completely blind and never got really far.
Shadowgate is also very creepy for an 8-bit game. It's impressive how much mood it can generate with that music and the writing. And yes, when you die in that game, you get a really kind of frightening Grim Reaper kind of character portrait who has something mean to say to you about it.
Right. So the Sword of Hope, like those are, I didn't look into it, but I think that they're Game Boy only RPGs in that vein. So you get that same perspective, those same adventure options, menus, whatever. But mixed with that is like as you walk around, you're also dragged into random encounters, and so like you have to hit the bats and the skeletons and whatnot, and you level up, you gain spells, etc. But this is very much a kind of a Dragon Quest 1 level of RPG where you don't have a party, you're just the one guy. You can have maybe like up to 3 enemies at once that you're fighting, and they each get their turn, and you get your one turn, and so like it's very grindy. You do want to level up a lot before you go anywhere new. So that part I'm not super enjoying, and because it's a very basic RPG, and like I don't see a way to make it more interesting. Like it's always going to be kill all the monsters that you can as efficiently as you can. Hope that you don't run out of herbs to heal yourself or magic points to get rid of some of the tougher enemies. But the more interesting part of it is the adventure aspect. And Now, it's very basic. The localization is, I'm not even sure if I can call it that. The translation is of a level where, like, I can tell what they meant to say, but that's not what they're saying. You know, like right away, you look at the opening scroll that tells you the story, and you're like, I know what you're going for here. I would have phrased things differently. I don't think that you're saying what you think you're saying. So there's that, but like in itself, like that's kind of charming, you know, like it's of that era. But it also has like a few fun touches, like, you know, if you are in front of I don't know, like a shopkeeper, like this lady, she's very nice. If you talk to her enough, like she'll let you go get like that special item that she saved in the storeroom. So, you know, you can go and like there are some adventure-y things that you can do, just like you would in like a Famicom detective title, where like, okay, just keep talking to this person, something will not unlock. There are some, you know, very basic puzzles that don't always make sense. Do use the... What did I use? Did I use a ruby on the organ to power up something? Or anyway, there's like some item that you want to use on the organ in the creepy church, because it's gonna give you something. Don't ask me why.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is it'd be a lot easier to remember what it was that you used on if it made any intuitive sense. But as was often the case in this era of adventure games, that was not a prerequisite, shall we say. No. But yeah, like some stuff is kind of cute on purpose also, you know, like, so if you use open on the, you know, the shopkeeper, she'll be like, oh my God, like, you know, don't, like, we can't do this here. Like, what are you doing? Or, I don't know, like, at some point, there was this dude, I think the shaman, who can give you back your health and magic points. I used open on him by accident, and he was just like, it's as if, like, you were tickling him, and, like, what are you doing? And, like, and he just, like, keeps, you know, laughing uncontrollably. And then, like, that ends, and, like, the text managed, despite the bad translation, managed to convey like the a great feeling of shame, you know, after that episode happened. So yeah. Anyway, so there's some cute stuff in there, but my initial quest is to meet these 3 wizards, get the key to their lairs first, do something for them, and then like eventually I'm going to be able to get the 3 doodads that will allow me to get the Sword of Hope, to get rid of the dragon that's plaguing the land. So at this point, I feel like I'm maybe like almost like 2/3 of the way into the adventure, unless there's like a Zelda type situation where the 3 medallions were just a prelude to what's next. But I feel like I've seen what this game is about, so I think I'm gonna stop. Like the random encounters are a little bit too repetitive for me to really keep going into, you know, trying to play this. I've got other stuff to play. But it's interesting. Again, like, if you have NSO, you can play this. So if you're at all interested in checking that out, if you've got like a nostalgia for those old MechVenture games, you know, go ahead. Like you're probably gonna get that hit of that type of game, and yeah. You don't have to finish it.
Well, I'm absolutely interested in Sword of Hope. I've always kind of been interested in it, but I never played it, and I had no idea it was a Shadowgate Deja Vu style adventure game, like mashed up with RPG stuff. So that is neat. I do want to check that out. I am not currently an NSO subscriber. I haven't been for a couple of years because there wasn't enough coming out on it that kept me interested. And I've never had the expansion pack. So, obviously with Switch 2 coming out next week, or maybe this week by the time people hear the episode, I'm going to be signing up for that stuff. So there are quite a few, Nintendo classic titles that have come out last couple of years that I haven't played yet. And, this is one that I'm looking forward to messing around with, probably mainly on the Switch 2. next to some GameCube titles and N64 curiosities and things like that. I'll be checking it out.
Yeah, for me, I enjoyed playing through the Gradius game, even brief, but, it's fun. And I gotta say, it is a Gradius game that works even if you die in the middle. I mean, obviously with NSO, it's the kind of thing where you could work around that Gradius problem, because you could be like, all right, I'm going to create a save state at the start of a stage where I'm fully equipped and I'll go back to that. Because those kinds of shoot 'em up sometimes, checkpoints can be like counterproductive, like where it's just like, no, if I'm restarting from later, I have no chance of building up an arsenal good enough to take down the boss. So I'd rather start farther back, and so you could, kind of accomplish that with save states, if you like, for, sort of certain Gradius games. But this one, I, again, kind of talked about this with the presumed audience issue of Game Boy with the earlier kind of, the Sunsoft game. It really is a case, I think, of Konami, were a bit more forgiving. And so, yeah, your arsenal can't grow as ridiculously huge because it's like the NES Gradius where you can only have 2 options, rather than like 4 or something. And so you just kind of, usually, even if, also probably just a constraint of the hardware, right? It's just like there's only so much they can have going on screen in this scenario, and they're wise to like redraw the Vic Viper so it's kind of small on screen, but you still have a limited amount of kind of play area to deal with here, right? So it can't be too frantic, but it all feels like it's pretty reasonably balanced around what it can do. It's just obviously it's not like a full Gradius experience, but it is a more forgiving one, and the scenario is kind of fun and all that. So it's like, yeah, this is great for NSO type stuff because it's like based on what I've read about the Interstellar Assault, as it's called, in America. I think it was called Nemesis 2 in Japan and Europe for some reason. But
the first game was called Nemesis in North America as well.
Oh, right.
It was one of those ultra games, right?
Yes, yeah. When they were they're using that sub label mostly just to publish more games on NES, but I guess the
Richard Bachman's Gradius. Yeah,
right. they had that sub label, so it's like we'll use it on Game Boy as well. I guess it's a bit strange, but it's something that I'd say this was better than the third Castlevania Game Boy game, but in both cases it's kind of like, would I purchase it separately when it's like not something that's like got the most sterling reputation? Maybe not, but it's fun for a quick blast through on the subscription service, and I hope we see the GBA Gradius show up at some point, maybe on the expansion pack. Gradius Galaxies, I believe, although that might have had more than one subtitle, so it might have been just Gradius Advanced somewhere, because there was a lot of that, at that time. And I don't think that like it reviewed fine, but it didn't. That with GBA, I was like buying games for my own money. I was a little bit kind of like, if it doesn't review really well, I won't buy it. Even though I love Gradius, I love all those classic Konami things. I was like, I'll just maybe I'll wait and get it later, and I never did. And I'd like to see that come back in some fashion, because I don't think it's ever been re-released in a collection or anything. Of course, we're getting that Gradius Origins collection, which is all arcade games, but maybe that'll be a kind of gateway to some more down the line, because certainly you think of stuff like Gradius Gaiden, you think of Gradius 5. There's quite a few games, that could use with like a re-release, either for the first time in a while, or in some cases first time ever. But possibly with Galaxies that, and Rebirth. You could throw that in there, because M2 made it on WiiWare, and they're making, these collections for Konami. So why not? That's pretty much. I've not been up to much more than playing through that very brief Gradius game, because I got done with Xenoblade Chronicles X, the extra stuff and all that. I've seen all of that now.
Congratulations.
Broadly speaking, I've got sort of mixed feelings on the extra stuff. Maybe at some point there'll be an appropriate venue to discuss those with James, in depth. But the overall experience was just fantastic. I mean, I already loved that game, and now it's like the extra conveniences and the much higher sort of fidelity, of the image quality and all the kind of just the faster, kind of pace of everything on Switch, with the not just like they changed like some of the ways you build affinity with the characters and just how much faster everything loads and everything. Like, it's just smoother, but even more fun, and enough passage of time that a lot of it kind of still landed nicely. So yeah, great experience. But yeah, having been done with that and being so close to Switch 2, I was a little bit sort of at a loss for what to do until those Game Boy games came along. So yeah, it was kind of nice to rip through Gradius pretty fast. And then the only thing left now is the fact that is the Switch 2 going to arrive in time for next week's episode? We shall see. I've been a little bit perturbed by the fact that the official Nintendo store over here seems to be struggling just to process all the payments of the orders it's taken. It's got this thing, this banner on the top of the website the past couple of days, which is like, we are processing payments for, and I love how needlessly oblique this is, products that release on June 5th. And then it's just don't freak out if we haven't charged you yet, basically. But I don't know if that's at all indicative of where we're going with how long this stuff is going to take to ship out. We'll see. But obviously, we'll report back in on that next week. For now, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will get to those promised emails about the upcoming change in the generation. So stay tuned. And welcome back, and as promised, we're going to head now into your listener mail. Like I said, these are all kind of Switch 2 relevant topics that people have sent in over the past several weeks that I wanted to get to before everything changes next week, even though in the podcast sense, that might be me having enough time to have booted up the system before the recording time, and that's if I'm lucky with what possibly like Royal Mail is being relied on to get it here in time. But anyway, well, let's just assume the world has changed by the time next week's episode has come along, and therefore we need to revel in our time that we still have in the old one. And we're going to begin with Lemonade, who writes, "Dear RFN, now that we're about to start a new Nintendo hardware generation, what are you most looking forward to? For me, it's what Nintendo might do with more powerful hardware. Switch 2 is the first significant upgrade we've had since Wii U 13 years ago. Thanks as always, and looking forward to the Switch 2 era of the show." So, a broad question, but there's something that's worth kind of contemplating now while we have all the various array of possibilities in our mind before, crushing reality starts narrowing them down for us.
Yeah, like what about this new system on the cusp of its release actually kind of gets your heart racing a little bit? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I'd be interested to hear what you think, Johnny. Given that we don't get to hear from you very often, is there a particular aspect of what they've showed so far that is intriguing, or is it just a more general thing of like, they're going to be able to do things that they really have not had the opportunity to do before?
Well, I'll say honestly, I mean, the thing that always interests me the most with Nintendo is what are the games, and they've been so cagey about that so far. I just don't think they've shown a lot of games considering, that the system's coming out in a week. And it's pretty clear to me that they've got some ideas for the end of the year that they're holding back on for right now. So, there's not as much to get excited about or to get hyped for at this stage, that you might for other systems. So at the moment, the thing that jumps out to me most is I'm just excited to hold it. because, we're recording this a week out, and, this is the first Nintendo system since the N64 that I have not had a chance to try before it came out, one way or another. That is that's not probably a very typical complaint or anything. It's not even a complaint. It's just an observation. I feel like I have a little bit more tangible expectation for a Nintendo system. And it's been that way a long time. So I'm going in a little bit more blind this time. And I do think that is affecting my excitement levels a little bit. Because I like to touch the hardware. I still have a lot of concerns about how does it feel in the hand and how mushy are the buttons, and, is the D-pad going to be good? And, I've read mostly positive things from people who have gotten to demo with, the hardware. But yeah, a lot of the questions I have would be even difficult to put into words, probably. They're questions that my hands will answer very quickly once I have the system here at home. And so I'm really looking forward to that and just sort of getting a feel for it. I really like exploring the menus and checking out all the system features and things, like a lot of it will be stuff I probably won't mess with 6 months from now. I won't think about it anymore. But the first week, I'll probably spend a lot of time digging through the eShop and seeing if they've changed the interface for that. And, all the different, weird little modes and settings and things that the system can do. And game share, I'm very curious about. It's it's kind of a throwback to the GBA. There was a version of game share over the link cable back on GBA. Not many games
and
used
download
it.
play with DS, of course, is like,
yes.
Very, very much like a thing back then, and
but very few games used it again.
Yeah, well,
right.
That's the thing. I mean, but obviously that was something you could still do on DS, because the data was small enough, that you could send like a reduced form of a game across, like maybe have like a limited multiplayer mode versus if both people have got the game, they can play the full stuff. But there's game share and the game chat stuff. It's been quite a heavy part of the marketing so far. So for me, probably not something I'm going to get a whole lot of use out of, but it is still going to be interesting how well some of this stuff actually works in practice. I mean, it's something you can always sort of count on a bit with Nintendo, isn't it? We used to say, they were so proud of the kind of streaming, like tech that they had, so that, solved for having the Wii U with the gamepad, to get that kind of lag free as possible kind of play and all that. Mm-hmm. You kind of felt like they would find some other use for that one day. And this is essentially is that, isn't it? Right. Yeah, Nintendo, they'll come back around to stuff. It may take a long time, and especially with these elongated sort of cycles that we're looking at now compared to the past, where we would only ever seemingly about 3 or 4 years away from some new piece of Nintendo hardware, trading off between portable and console. Now it'd be a shock if we did have a Switch 3 anywhere before like 7 years hence, wouldn't it, really, way things are settling in now. But maybe we'll get more of a substantial like mid-cycle refresh this time, because it kind of felt like we might have got that, but then the pandemic restrictions kicked in and there was no need for it, because it just sold off the hook and sort of changed everything, and indeed may have changed how quickly the Switch 2 came along, based on the people have looked at the architecture of the system and kind of suggested that originally maybe they were putting it together with the eye to bringing it to market, sooner than they have, which is where you'd hope that they really would be ready. Johnny talked about it, the games, right? The games is ultimately what it's all about. That's what we're looking forward to, in some form or fashion. And you would hope that the fact that maybe it's the Switch did so well that it's given them the chance to, wait a little bit longer to bring it to market would mean that, grappling with the fact that this is the first time in a long time that they've had to move the goalposts on the sort of technical aspect of the game development, that was a challenge for them with Wii U. I think it's fair to say they did not take to it all that well. And it was a challenge for a lot of people, adjusting to the HD, sort of transition. But hopefully it'll ease that a little bit and we'll see some really interesting things out of it. Because that's ultimately it, isn't it? It's one thing to say higher resolutions and better frame rates and I'm looking forward to some of that. So I'm looking forward to seeing, the Zelda games run in a lot more of a stable fashion. And others in that vein. But I would say of all the things they've shown so far, it's Donkey Kong, a Bonanza, that sort of is the thing that you're most interested by, where it's kind of like, okay, it seems like you're using that extra horsepower to say you've got a slightly different style of game, right? Like, so you can look at it and say it seems like it's got some things in common with some 3D Mario games and whatnot, but, the destructible, I had this idea of like everything's kind of destructible and, how much that's going to factor into the gameplay. It does kind of feel like, that this is, the sort of freedom that they've got by having this more substantially different hardware for the first time in over a decade, manifesting itself in the game design, in the kind of experience that they're trying to make. And it's those sorts of things more generally, right? I think it would be even more of an anticipation if we had more examples like that in the lineup so far, which maybe we don't. And some of it might be because they're holding some things back or various other things, but that's for me is kind of emblematic of what's really, where are they going to take some of this stuff? Because while they're moving the goalpost technically, that's never, what they sell. You can get your PS5 Pro or whatever, just PC, whatever, like that's not what you come to Nintendo for in general. So I'm hoping they've got some kind of compelling stuff in that area. What about you, Guillaume?
I guess I'm blasé enough to say that I'm not really that excited about the Switch 2. I'm not one of those people who is like calling for new hardware to be released. I've been mostly happy with the Switch, but I guess I wouldn't be fully happy with it. Like I wouldn't have been feeling like I was missing something if I, like the fact that I got an Xbox probably betrays I wasn't completely happy with it, right? So I guess the one thing I'm looking forward to the most is, I don't know if I should repeat this. Well, she said it in the Discords, so I guess that's probably okay. But like Soren seemed to imply that the Switch 2 would be more aligned, like its architecture would be more aligned with what the, the other two consoles are. And so, like, this would probably mean like better or like more rapidly ported games to Switch, and so I guess like what I'm looking for is the kind of the parity with the third party games that the other consoles are getting. Like I'm not expecting to get something that plays as smoothly or that looks as nice. Like there is a hardware difference here, but maybe hopefully like we'll get like, I don't know, like the new Resident Evil day and date with the other platforms. I don't know. Like that would be nice. Actually, I name Resident Evil.
At least it probably won't need to be a streaming title anymore. Cloud streaming.
Right. Or, like sometimes like the ports have come, but they've been very, very late, or they're from like several generations ago, like the Assassin's Creed games. Like if we... I guess, like, in my head, like, the example I have is, Yakuza Like a Dragon. If we can start getting those games at the same time. That seems to me like a realistic ask, like, to get a Like a Dragon game at the same time as the other consoles get it. Because those games are not powerhouses, like, you don't go to them for the dazzling latest special effects or whatever, for the ray tracing or what have you. You're gonna get that one location that's just a fucking office that they've used like for 7 different games. That's fine, but like if we can get those instead of 4 years late, if we can get them at the same time, that would be like a pretty big thing.
And it's interesting.
Other than that,
it's interesting. I would say, like if you're a franchise that does a lot of its business in Japan, you would have thought that would that calculus of like, is this something that we can also have on Switch 2 is going to, weigh a lot heavier for them, right? Because, nothing's taken for granted so far, but assuming that Switch 2 is mostly able to, successfully assume the mantle of the original Switch in Japan, Nintendo is going to completely own that market for the next several years, unless, the rumours about Sony possibly considering getting back in the dedicated hardware portable sphere and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a proven success in Japan. So you got to think some of those series, Monster Hunter, all that kind of stuff, are going to have a very long look, presumably, at being able to get games on there pretty quickly. But yeah, please go on.
Yeah, no, and I mean like. The Yakuza series, like, they did make a port on the Wii U for Japan, but the porting process was not smooth, right? Like, it was probably difficult to port, and also it didn't run very well, and also the user base wasn't there, so it didn't sell, so it didn't go anywhere. But I could see maybe this becoming more of a Monster Hunter situation, where like Nintendo is kind of hard to ignore at this point. Probably it's unwise to ignore them at this point. And so if the process of making games for the Switch 2 is similar enough to what it is for the other consoles, maybe we can hope for a little bit more timely third-party support. Anyway, that's what I've got my finger crossed for. Other than that, I don't know. Like, I guess maybe the mouse stuff is like opening the possibility that perhaps we're going to get some cool NSO games that we haven't seen in a while. Like, I still hate myself for not getting SimCity for SNES when I could. On the virtual console. Was it the Wii or the Wii U virtual console? It was the Wii,
I would
right?
say Wii. I didn't have it on either, actually, in the end. But yeah, I would imagine it was that. I don't think it was Wii U.
Because that was a game that was there for a little bit, and it was like one of the first games that was retired early. And I don't think I even knew that. Yeah, like I think that's when it was removed from the service. I think that's when I knew, like, oh, they can remove games from the service. So don't dilly-dally too much if you want to get one of those virtual console games. So, like maybe this is a second opportunity to release that on NSO. I would like to check it out. I say that, but at the same time, there are a lot of old games that I've wanted for a long time. Like I've said, I wanted to play Pilot Wing 64 for a long time. Don't look up how much time I actually spent in it now that we have it. It's probably less than an hour. But this is why NSO is good, right? Like you don't, you don't spend too much. Like it doesn't cost you too much in terms of money or time if it ends up like, okay, like I checked it out. It's out of my system. I can forget about this now. Yeah,
you satisfied your curiosity, but it doesn't need to be a sink for your time or your money or any. If it doesn't go any further than that, so be it.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
And so like there's maybe a handful of other mouse-focused games, like of course Mario Paint, but the one that comes to mind to me is King Arthur's World, and anyone who's played it on the Super Nintendo probably has that same kind of vibe from the game that I do, like this kind of nostalgia for it. Like immediately if I said this title and the Ride of the Valkyries came to mind for you, like yeah, you've checked out this game before and now you want to play it, right? I know I'm right.
And the Krusty the Clown game probably, I think, is a little bit similar to that.
There's a Mario Paint, Mario and Wario
sure.
is another way where we'll get any of those kind of stuff. Or just, any emulating pointer type stuff, some of those like shooting gallery kind of games. We'll see how far that goes. Go on, Johnny.
Well, Guy mentioned SimCity. Unfortunately, I don't think the Super Nintendo version of SimCity had mouse support on that.
It was
platform,
like a launch game, wasn't it? It was really early.
Yeah, it was too early for the mouse. So they would need to really, that's probably not likely. But along the same lines, I've been thinking about how, maybe this is a new and better opportunity for Nintendo to support some DS games. On the Nintendo Classics, Nintendo Switch Online service. And more so, obviously we've got GameCube, and I'm excited about that as the former director of Planet GameCube, 20 years ago. I'm excited for the GameCube library and to check out some of those games again. But, if Switch 2 can emulate GameCube just fine, it can probably handle Wii games too. They're not much more powerful.
You would think so.
You don't need much more hardware to run a Wii game versus a GameCube game. And the mouse controls seem like a pretty good proxy for the pointer controls. And of course, the Joy-Con has plenty of motion sensing as well. So I think we could see Wii games eventually come on. If not on the online service, at least you could imagine some Wii games getting ported to Switch 2, with a little bit of a modern, polish. And remastering.
They've done some games stuff that like that.
Really be difficult to play outside of Wii. I think you could see some of those brought back to this system.
It's interesting because you already had Pikmin 1 and 2 as, mostly just kind of, high res version, very faithful versions of those GameCube games. But now you could do new play control Pikmin 1 and 2.
Yes.
Oh dear.
It's funny that's the first Wii game that came to mind for you, Greg.
It's just when have they done GameCube stuff? Not as, a sort of, as obviously NSO, didn't exist yet for that, but they did it, Sunshine was in the 3D All-Stars collection, and then, those Pikmin games together. But yeah, it'd be nice if it was, something. Not that this was by any, Galaxy, the original Galaxy were fine, in that 3D All-Stars collection, but if it's something that helps us, bring along, Galaxy 2 at some point, because that's, just kind of sitting there, not getting re-released, that would certainly be nice. But, other than, obviously the just imagining, and it is, it's very difficult for me. I'm not a very imaginative person, and I should bloody well hope that they're very much more imaginative over at Nintendo. Just the broadest, thinking about what they might come up with in very vague terms. There are some much more down to earth kind of things. I think generally the sort of thing has got to be, kind of loading. I'm just hoping that it's all going to kind of, the problem is obviously the file sizes are going to be bigger, right? The games are going to be more complex, but it's funny, when Switch came along, a lot of it was oh God, this is so much, everything loads so much faster than Wii U. Because Wii U was really bad in that regard, wasn't it? Yeah. Certain games in particular. I never played the Wii U version of Sharp FE, Tokyo Mirage Sessions. But apparently that was really, really, problematic in that regard. And then, when it was on Switch, it was
on top of it. Wii U had very long startup sequences too, just at the system level. So every time you wanted to play something on Wii U, it was sitting around for 30 seconds before you really even had a menu. And they eventually kind of tried to shortcut that by letting you activate certain things directly from the gamepad before the console had fully
essentially
booted
bypass
up. And even then,
as much as it could.
Right. Yeah. And that was at best a partial solution. So, but yeah, I tend to agree. I think the faster load times are going to be a noticeable improvement. And that's a really nice quality of life thing that I enjoy a lot on the modern consoles, the PS5, Xbox, Series, whatever. And even, a laptop. I don't have a powerful laptop, but it's noticeably faster than whatever I would be doing on Switch. So very much look forward to that.
And that's the thing, obviously, you can't, it's not going to match the speeds of like these solid state drives, is it? But at least with this, the SD Express and the new game cards and all this kind of stuff, like it feels like we're at least, again, the goalposts are moving, so we don't really know how well it's going to kind of entirely compensate for that. But it certainly, with some of the earlier games, that already exist and stuff like that, you just kind of, that it should manifest itself there in terms of going back to Switch games or like Switch 2 editions of games and whatnot. But hopefully it balances out somewhere where it feels like we're kind of making a certain amount of progress in that regard. Because over the past 8 years, sadly, the kind of wow factor of like, oh, it's so much better than Wii U has given way to, this is starting to bog certain things down. I would mention, it's not like a huge problem, but like something like Mario and Luigi Brothership that I played last year, like that, that you feel the load times, play going into battle a bit there, which some of that is because you're used to playing Mario and Luigi games on stuff like GBA and DS where they very much weren't load times, but it's that kind of stuff kind of feels like, if we've got to a point, on Switch where you're feeling those kinds of things, that's one of those cases where I'm ready for the transition. I'm ready for things to kind of change in that regard, and we'll see how well that works out. But let's move on to our next question from long-time listener Adolf, who writes, recently the specs have been discovered for the Nintendo Switch 2. How do they compare to other modern consoles? Apparently, game chat is a huge drag on hardware performance. 12 gigabytes of RAM seems so odd and small. Why not just go to the standard 16? How many more pennies will Nintendo save? It seems like my M1 MacBook Air with 16 gigabytes of RAM is a more powerful gaming machine than the Switch 2. I know Nintendo is great at using the hardware they have, but I think the RAM is very disappointing, especially knowing that game chat is a problem for the console. If game chat is chugging along in promo videos, how will it be in real world experiences? I'm having Smash Bros. Brawl online flashbacks. A few things presumably you're having those flashbacks sort of very in a very staccato rhythm, but it's a couple of things to unpack with this in terms of, I'm not, very technically minded. I don't own the Xbox Series of whatever. I don't own a PS5, so I'm not that au fait with their various technical pluses and minuses and all that kind of thing. But, I suppose it's true that the standard 16 gigabytes of, that is how much the Series X and the PS5 have, right? So I guess that's a kind of a standard in that sense, right?
Okay.
But I
was wondering whose standard that is.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's what Adolf is referring to there, because I'm maybe the PS5 Pro has more, and I know the Xbox Series S, the digital only, like cheaper version, that has, I believe, 10 gigabytes of RAM, and in that case, 2 gigabytes is reserved for the OS there. Because, I think one of the things that Adolf is getting at here is the fact that, yes, the Switch 2 has 12 gigabytes of RAM. The 3 of that will be reserved for the OS. And some of the reason why I guess it's that much is for the functioning of game chat. Now, to be fair, if you're looking at this in relative terms, as I understand it, it's not really that different than what we've seen, with Switch 1 and, like I said, Xbox Series S, for example, in terms of the percentage of the overall RAM that's being set aside that isn't available, to software, right? So, for instance, like I said, with the Series S, it's like 20% of what it's got basically is set aside, 2 out of the 10. With Switch, I believe it had 4 gigabytes of RAM and like 0.8 of it was set aside for the OS. And so, in this case, 3 out of the 12, 25%, it's a bigger percentage, but it's not way bigger. It's not that different. I don't know that you'd say it's like off the map here. In that regard. And, in terms of how this manifests itself in the software and all that kind of thing, it's important to remember that it's such a different hardware scenario, right? Like we can say it's got 9 gigabytes of RAM available to it, or to the software, which is like more than an Xbox Series S has, right? But it's also constrained by things that the Xbox Series S is definitely not constrained by the fact that this is a mobile chipset. It has to consider the portable mode, and how much power that uses is like a tiny amount, right? Like I think it's basically they're saying it's going to have like a 2-hour minimum, sort of like minimum battery life or whatever. So you can kind of infer from that it's drawing power at like 10 watts. So it's like, there's only so much you can do with a system, in the portable mode anyway, that is only going to be drawing that much power, because otherwise it's going to run out in, the battery would run out in a matter of an hour or less or whatever. So, there's constraints that go way beyond just like the CPU speed, the GPU speed, the gigabytes of RAM. But then there's other things, that can kind of make up for it maybe in other ways. The fact that this has a more up-to-date kind of architecture, much more so obviously than Switch 1, but even than some of those the systems that came onto the market in 2020. With the super sampling, the kind of AI upscaling, it's early days. You have, there's not a lot out there really, like people have not had, I don't think advanced units to look at in the media with Switch 2, at all. I think they basically had the attitude that there's going to be this day one patch, which is giving me Wii U flashbacks. I didn't have one at launch, but I remember all the experiences of people coming through talking about what a nightmare applying that Wii U day one patch was, for the firmware or whatever. So that could be fun next week. But, because nothing is going to work until that goes out, they're just not giving the outlets the hardware ahead of time. And so a lot of this stuff, you just got limited press assets, which are of kind of, the quality of those for doing really fine comparisons is not that great. But, people have looked at stuff like the Cyberpunk footage that they've seen and said, it looks relatively kind of, favorable compared with, something that the kind of result that you might get on a Series S, for instance, even though it's assuredly doing it in quite a different way because of all the hardware differences we mentioned. They're probably, it's going to be a lower actual resolution fundamentally, and then it's going to be kicked up with that super sampling. But the overall result, I think, and this is something that's been kind of looked at with Street Fighter 6 as well, it ends up looking pretty good. It ends up looking not that different from, the more powerful console version. So I'm certainly not nearly educated in this sort of stuff to tell you, how much of a bottleneck the 9 gig of available RAM is, and how this is going to manifest itself and all that. But it's just important to note that it's it's not as straightforward at just looking at the basic, kind of numbers and doing the really kind of broad comparisons. We're only really going to see it in action, once the software starts hitting the shell, how people are actually been able to, kind of put together, something that works based on what the system can do. And let's face it, that's always going to be an evolving process, right? The start of the system, people weren't doing nearly the same sorts of things on Switch at the beginning as they've been doing, in the last few years, have they? So,
there's some mastery involved there that comes with development over time. But another thing, and I think this might directly address the concern here about game chat being a resource hog. That is the kind of thing that actually might get better over time. So, you know, if currently, let's say currently the OS, as you said, Greg, and I haven't seen this source, but if you're saying it takes up 3 gigabytes of RAM to run the operating system and all the background features like game share, game chat, that may shrink down to 2.5 gigs in a couple years.
Yeah.
And that's fairly typical for these platforms, that the core functionality, the platform holders will find ways to kind of compress all that and optimize it, make it more efficient. And so that they could run those processes in a more lean fashion in the background. And that doesn't necessarily benefit launch titles, but it might benefit games that come out 2 or 3 years from now where they have a little bit more juice to squeeze out of the system that they can apply toward the game directly. So that might actually get better. But you were talking earlier about the battery life, and I know this always comes up when we talk about portable systems, but I think there's a lot more than just battery life that goes into these kinds of hardware architecture decisions. You've got to think about temperature management, heat management, the weight and the center of gravity of the system. So you could always make the battery life better by making the battery bigger, but then that has its own trade-offs, especially for a handheld system, not just in cost, but in the physical dimensions and you know, the ergonomics of
how
system.
portable is it? So how playable is it as a handheld thing? You know,
the physical size of the entire thing. So there are so many delicate trade-offs involved with stuff like this, and I'm sure that Nintendo understands those things and probably handles them better than almost any other company in the world, because the Switch is their only product, basically. I mean, their only like physical product of any meaningful value. So they're going to get that part of it as right as they can. And it's still, there might be room for improvement that we'll see down the road, whether it's in some upgraded model or just a firmware update. So I'm not too worried about that kind of thing. But you know, does the Switch 2 need to compare favorably in power to like an Xbox Series S? I mean, I like hearing that it does. I can tell you, I own a Series S. That's my Xbox, and I play on it almost every day, and it's a great system. And I rarely have technical issues with it. When I do, it's usually screen tearing. It's usually some kind of like really strange artifacting that I get across the bottom third of the screen because I don't think the VRR works correctly, and Switch 2 won't have that problem because it doesn't support VRR apparently. I hope that comes in later.
Well, on television, it's a strange faux pas to get that information out there incorrect, isn't it? That one. I know they're dealing with a lot. It's a lot different from when they were doing Switch 1. It's basically like, well, everything's new. So it's just like, whereas with this, they've had so much information to wade through that pertains to the last system and how the games are going to run on it, and, you know, all this others, all the comparisons and the transitions and stuff that they didn't have to worry about. But you wouldn't thought that a piece of, you know, the new functionality should get lost in that shuffle. It should just be like, okay, yeah, well, you know, the portable screen could do it, and at least for now, you know, the dock play can't. Like that, how do you lose track of that? But go on.
Yeah. You wonder if maybe at one point the dock was going to support that, and then there's some fairly late change, you know, said, oh yeah, we can't really do that anymore, so we need to take that out. It doesn't seem like an oversight to, you know, to have to do that correction. It seems like probably a configuration. Something
actually changed, and then that kind of helped to get lost.
I think likely so. But anyway, I guess my point is, I've owned the Xbox Series S now for, I think, about 3 years. Never once have I considered upgrading to a Series X. It is not interesting to me at all. Whatever bells and whistles you get with a more powerful version of this system, I don't need. The Series S works very well. It is not necessarily I don't know what my primary gaming platform would be these days, but I play a lot of Xbox, and I'm very satisfied with that thing. So if Switch 2 can look like that on my TV, but then also is portable, that sounds like a great situation. That sounds like, you know, I'm going to be pleased with my purchase next week. And we'll see. I mean, I am interested in the docked performance. Certainly, I'd like to go back to playing my Switch docked. I really haven't been doing that much the last few years.
No, I don't really.
When Tears of the Kingdom came out, I played some of that on the TV, just because they're much longer sessions with Zelda. But for the most part, Switch is a pure handheld for me, and that's not necessarily what I would want. It's just that it doesn't look great on the TV. And the things I'm playing on it don't necessarily compete for TV time the way that some of the other console games do that I have. But I do think that will change. I think we'll be playing a lot of Mario Kart World on the TV, certainly. But I'm very interested in the handheld performance, because I think that's the way most of us will play this thing.
Yeah.
For the most part.
No, I
think it's going to be.
Oh, go on.
You could get lost in comparisons to other platforms. Steam Deck is a much more interesting comparison, and I don't own a Steam Deck. I've not spent any time with it. I think it's a very fascinating prospect and a really interesting counterpart to the Switch 2. Although I think direct competition has probably been overblown between these two.
Sure.
But I think that I think it's probably not that useful to compare Switch 2 performance against a PS5 or a modern Xbox, because those systems don't do what Switch 2 does. And so, it's maybe an interesting comparison, but not a very fair one or a very useful one. The more interesting comparison for me, really the most important one, is how does Switch 2 compare to Switch 1? Because it is going to end up taking up a very similar part of my life, I expect. Even Switch 1 games that I've been playing lately, I'm very eager to switch over and play those on the new hardware. So I think the benefits of the new system for those games, and among the launch titles will be very evident. And I think if you're used to the Switch, and how it performs, I suspect that the Switch 2 will be quite impressive. And you can compare it to a PlayStation if you want to. I don't think you're doing yourself a favor comparing it to your M1 MacBook Air, by the way, which costs easily twice as much as a Switch 2 when it was new. So, yes, is that a more powerful gaming machine than the Switch 2? Probably, but, like all PC gaming platforms, it comes at a great expense. And so, especially with a Mac. So, I don't think that's a very helpful comparison point at all.
Well, it's one thing we should mention as well with the game chat stuff specifically. Adolf mentions the game chat chugging along in promo videos. Now, this is one of the interesting aspects. I've been a little bit surprised to some degree that with the amount of promotional material that they've actually dwelled on the chat going on it, because I do feel like there is this potential that we've seen in this very email, for a kind of bit of a misconception about what's going on there. In terms of, to me, it seems quite clear that it's like, well, those feeds are low refresh rate feeds. They're not slowing down because they're struggling to be processed by the hardware. They're cut rate feeds by design, so that, the whole process is manageable, right? So it's not like it's meant to be running
fast. The goal
fast.
there is to keep everyone in sync, right?
Yeah. So
which we know a lot about from podcasting over Discord and Skype and such.
Yeah, it can be an
the
adventure.
goal is not to have the best quality video stream coming from 3 other people at the same time while yours also goes out to them. I think the goal is for everybody to keep up with each other so you can have a natural conversation. And if somebody says, hey, look at my screen, you're not waiting 30 seconds to see what they're talking about. So that's going to be prioritized in the game chat background. And like you said, it's going to drop refresh rates on the video. It's going to reduce the resolution. It's going to do whatever it needs to do to try to keep everybody participating in that game chat synchronized as best as it can, because ultimately the detail you can make out on somebody else's picture in picture of their face or something from their cam is probably an easy sacrifice to make, as long as you can continue talking and you can actually see their face.
Yeah. So the point is like, by design, it's not like, oh, well, this is meant to be running at, those extra feeds are meant to be running at a refresh rate of 30, or something. But because they've run into difficulty with the processing power, now it's been it's sunk down into, obviously, the promotional videos would not show that. They would not show something performing in, kind of difficult conditions. It's just that's where it's, by design, it's, they're obviously kind of setting it at a kind of modest, refresh rate to make it manageable and to keep it synchronized, as you say. But that is the issue, isn't it? It's like when you have something on screen that has that choppiness to it, it just doesn't look that hot. If you're actually talking with your friends and playing with your friends, maybe it doesn't matter, right? Because you're focused on playing what you're playing, interacting with your friends, whatever. I can see that it could still be fine in practice, but in terms of showing it off in some of this promotional material, I do wonder if, maybe, they might have scaled that back a little bit. Although I guess, you have to show it to a certain degree, right? If you're going to try and help sell your console with this feature that they've obviously put a lot into, you can't hide it. That's just totally counterproductive. But I have seen some more kind of promotional little snippets since that seem like they spent a little more time with just the icons for voice chat rather than the video chat. And I do wonder if maybe some feedback had got back to people at Nintendo that, maybe there was some, amount of kind of misconceptions out there of just this is emblematic of, the hardware being incapable of keeping up with the action or whatever, because, that's not an impression you really want to have, is it? But, I get it's another one of those kind of things that's, it's not to the level of, some earlier problematic things in terms of selling stuff like, what's it actually like looking into a Virtual Boy, or, stereoscopic 3D when you can't show that on the TV when it was the parallax barrier on 3DS. But, it does kind of feel like, it probably works better, when you're actually using it than when they're showing it. And I think they've kind of run into a little bit of that problem there. But, I think we'll move on to our next email just now, unless Guillaume, you have anything to add on this hardware performance business.
I probably know even less than you about RAM and all that stuff.
That's the thing. I'm not the best to ask about this.
None of us are experts.
I'm doing my best just to kind of be generalities, but unfortunately, if anything's woefully inaccurate, I do apologise. But yes, we'll move on now. So, A-Money from Buckhorn writes, Gents, I'm as excited as anybody about the upcoming Switch 2 and have registered my email for pre-order availability updates. With that said, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Or I'm overreacting. I place my psychological diagnosis in your hands. Nintendo games are notorious for not going on sale. The argument that I agree with, specific to Nintendo, is that they disproportionately have sterling quality, and so they hold their value. That said, with games going on sale elsewhere, especially Steam, is there a risk of the scales tipping against Nintendo as these price disparities grow in size? Is Nintendo entering a stage of hubris/greed? The biggest canary in the coal mine for me is the fact that they would charge for an interactive manual Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. It's the principle behind the fact that they would charge for this. Entirely their prerogative, but also a sign of larger, gross things possibly being afoot. Or not. Maybe this is just normal crazy Nintendo doing capitalism things and that's all. At this point, I'm happy to support them because there is a polish and general philosophy of quality in their games that is distinct, but I'm concerned they're leveraging that more transparently against my wallet with this new console cycle. Thanks for your thoughts.
So have you guys talked about Welcome Tour very much?
We've touched on it a little bit. I think I mentioned it maybe the most, just in the sense that I was surprised it wasn't a Switch Online reward. Like, that it was something they did charge separately for, but they might mostly expect people, to have as a perk, of being a subscriber. But there's nothing to suggest that is the case. I mean, I guess they could add it in the future or something, but there's nothing to suggest that it isn't just a straight up purchase.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that would have made a lot of sense. But I guess, until people have reviews and, we can try these things for ourselves. I guess I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. It doesn't seem like something that I would want to spend $10 for from what they've shown. So they haven't done a good job of convincing me that it's worthwhile, but I'm not, opposed to the idea if I read, some impressions of it that make it sound like, yeah, there's some depth here. It's actually kind of cool. There's something more here than you might have expected at first impression. I'm open to that. If they had
packaged it with an extra controller, would that change your perception of the value at all?
Well, no, but probably not. And I'm
sorry, this is a Wii Play joke.
Yeah,
here.
No, people
enough.
just got Wii Play whether they wanted it or not, right? That was the thing most of the time. It was just like, you're going to get a controller.
Partly that was because it was hard to find controllers at the time. So Wii Play was kind of like a very convenient way to just purchase a controller that you might not otherwise find on the stores. And so, that was pretty smart for Nintendo. But yeah, I do kind of look at this as a Wii Play thing. Like Wii Play probably, if they had released it as a standalone game, it probably would have been like $20. And a lot of people might say it wouldn't have been worth $20. Like I don't think Wii Play is a great game. Most people don't seem to think that it's really that fantastic. But $20 seems like a reasonable price point for something like Wii Play. And Welcome Tour does not seem as much fun as Wii Play from what I've seen, but I do kind of wonder if there's, I know there are some little mini games in there. There might even be some sort of creativity tools. It looked to me like there might be some interesting little, interactive elements like that. I'm curious. I don't think I'm going to drop $10. I don't think I'm $10 curious about Welcome Tour right now. But I am curious enough to hear what other people have to say about it. I don't think I don't want to dismiss it out of hand as like, it's crazy that they would charge for something like this. It's unusual. And it might be a little bit of Nintendo pride that another company would say, yeah, look, this is not something that people are going to buy. But I don't know. Calling it an interactive manual might be a little overly dismissive. It might turn out to be more than that and better than that.
Well, so, I think we'll see. If I had to guess, and that's it, we are just guessing, and I mean, it might take a little bit for like coverage of something like this to kind of come out if people haven't got like the kind of usual pre-release like access to it or something, but I feel like it's probably one of these situations where actually charging for it and the amount that they are charging for it is reflective of, what they feel they've put into it. From a developer point of view, the effort and the time and the thought and maybe the little touches and Easter eggs and things they've put into it. It's like, that's, something you charge for. But that may not align with it's something that people pay for. So I imagine, well, like I say, I don't want to prejudge it, certainly having no exposure to it, myself. But I do wonder whether we've just, hit, because it's not, a conventional game, you've just got a little bit of that kind of misalignment there between the care that Nintendo have put into it, but how much that actually shows up in anyone's appetite for it, is debatable, and ultimately, it's just going to be a case of whether anybody wants to try at a certain point. But there's obviously the broader conversation here about, the cost of the software, with Switch 2 and all that. And I guess that's the thing, is that it does, you've got the general thing of that some games are going to be $80, where, Mario Kart certainly is when it's purchased separately. And then, but a number of other games are going to be $70, Donkey Kong Bonanza, But then it is all these other things around the edges, I think, that maybe do contribute to a perception of, that Nintendo's kind of clawing back like their share, if you like, any way they can, because obviously you've had things like the gold coins going away, the vouchers, seemingly, at this point, it doesn't seem to be any kind of like successor program to that for the Switch 2, or, so yeah, you kind of add these things together. And it does start to seem like, basically, they, and I mean, there's a certain logic to it from the point of view that at the start of a console cycle, these are things that maybe, you've got a little bit more latitude to do because there's more acceptance. Everyone's always going to be reluctant to accept prices going up or, incentives going down or, savings going down. But there's more acceptance when it is at the beginning of a new cycle, and that there's this feeling that this hardware does things that you couldn't do before. And so you do it now so that you don't have to do it later when there may still be years of inflation and, all sorts of cost increases and whatnot to deal with. But you'd be loath to do it then, because then it's just more transparently, no, we're just taking stuff back. We're taking stuff away. We're, just making the deal less generous than it was before. And that's not something that people want to do. They will do it if they feel like they have to. We've already seen, we talked about, some of these price increases that Sony and Microsoft have been making, in recent times. So, and that's very much in the middle of the PS5 Series X generation or whatever. So if needs must, they'll do it. But I guess some of it is maybe why it feels like it's all happening at once is because, they're hoping Nintendo are hoping they can just do that now and just set the terms, and, people will, reluctantly in some cases, but, there'll be some amount of acceptance and then just move on and you won't have to do it again. But, I don't know whether I'd say it's outright like just hubris or greed, although you could argue there's some parallels, if you want to say, coming into the 3DS, there was a lot of talk about how, maybe they priced the Wii too low, because in the end it was super popular and people were paying silly prices to scalpers, and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, oh God, we wish we'd priced it higher, basically. And then of course, when the 3DS comes out and it seems quite expensive and then they end up having to do a price cut straight away, it's like, did they get too far down that road of saying like, oh, well, let's, set the price high, because, you can't put it up, later, and, let's start with it high. And I guess, we could always go down if we really need to. And then, well, they did really need to. So, maybe, there is some previous there with, overconfidence. What do you think, Guillaume?
Yeah, it's a little bit, I don't know what to think about it, basically. It reminds me, so I don't think I'm willing to pay the $10 for this, especially since over here it's more like $15, I assume. It seems like a collection of tech demos, right? I haven't really looked into it that much. I feel like it would need to have like a surprising amount of Nintendo charm for me to actually pay attention and be like, you know what, I need to check this out. Because otherwise, to me, this reminds me of something like Face Raiders on the 3DS. One of the apps that, came with the system, and it was free, and it was essentially a tech demo, right? Like, here's what AR is. Here's what you can do with it. Now, this uses the camera. You're maybe not used to having a camera on your portable system. So, like, this is an example of what it can do. This is not a deep game. You're not going to play this over and over again, but it is fun to put, like your cat's face and your weird first person shooter thing and, try to shoot tennis balls at it. I can't remember really Face Raiders all that well.
No, it was very much a siloed experience to that. In the early 2011.
Yeah,
I don't remember after that.
But like at the same time, it was free. It was a tech demo, but also it was new for a lot of people, right? Like Nintendo didn't invent augmented reality, but for a lot of us, I think it was our first experience with AR gameplay or using AR at all. In this case, for the Switch 2, the tech demos are for things that are maybe not as new, right? Okay, your mouse can detect how much you're twisting it on the the Z-axis. Anyway,
the putting green kind of the concept that was shown.
Yeah. So it can help you better understand what this peripheral can do, but it's not. I feel like people are going to get it pretty quickly if they encounter a game that uses it. And the fact is, I feel like they probably won't unless Nintendo, delivers on that promise, or actually had the gameplay ideas that they want to do beyond a putting game with this ability that the Joy-Con mouse has. So yeah, it's weird because it feels at the same time less essential for the system to have these tech demos, and also they're making you pay for it. So
yeah.
In a way, it's like, well, you don't actually need this. So the people who really want it, pay us $10.
Yeah, well, it like I said, it's kind of peculiar from a commercial point of view to really get to how this happened. It feels more just like, I don't know, that somebody somewhere, there was a development of the idea of like, how can we show off the hardware features. And, it maybe like more went into it than really should have done. And then it's like, okay, well, what do we do with this now? And then, you don't really have a perfect kind of way of dealing with it, and just charging a separate, purchase is the best thing that they've come up with. But I still kind of feel like that subscriber perk would make a bit more sense, because you could still have the option to purchase it for people who are not subscribers, obviously. But just another thing to say, oh well, ostensibly this is a $10 value or whatever, so isn't it great being a Switch Online subscriber? I wouldn't rate it as one of the top reasons to subscribe for the first time or resubscribe, but I guess it's something, some bit of ostensible value there. But no, I guess there's another part to this in terms of all the things that they've been doing again that I think might contribute to this overall perception of kind of penny pinching, or just trying to sort of tilt the scales in their favor, vis-a-vis the consumer, which is an email we're not going to have time to get through in full. But Mihai was talking about the virtual game card thing in terms of how it affects your ability within a family group to actually play like the same game on two different systems from a single purchase. Mm-hmm. I find it interesting, that they went down that road, because again, what they've ended up doing, I feel like, is taking away something from people that use their Switch accounts, in that fashion. Which was, as Mihai noted in the email, was something that they, Nintendo themselves outlined you could do. Is not like it was some crazy workaround or something. Right. But the point is like families could buy the game once and then play it online together, without having to make an extra purchase. And then, this virtual game card thing kind of puts an end to that. And it's just interesting that you would it seems to me like what they've prioritized here is not, being, averse to taking things away from people. Cause that's generally, like I said, with the price, discussion earlier, you generally want to avoid that, right? Because it upsets people. It kind of rallies them around something as being, unacceptable, and they're less amenable to the various other things you offer them in the future after that, right? So you don't want to do that, but yet they seem to have chosen to do that, because otherwise it would be like, oh, well, if you go to Switch 2, it's like going backwards. So it's like they had to take something away from the Switch 1 people, just so, Switch 2 seems like it's not a downgrade in a particular way.
I don't think that's why they did it.
Virtual game cards.
I mean, it looks to me like this was more of a simplification. I think the virtual game cards in some ways are better than the way it used to work. But most importantly, the virtual game cards are a much easier way to understand and communicate how to share a game with, share a digital game with someone else. And I'm not positive about this, but I think you'll be able to share them between Switch 1 and 2, for Switch 1 games.
Yeah.
And so that also kind of necessitates, streamlining the way things work on the original Switch so that it can be compatible with Switch 2. So this just seems like Nintendo, what was effectively a loophole, although a semi-sanctioned loophole that was being used in the past for people to buy one copy of a game and basically get multiple copies of it. I think, it's probably not that Nintendo, maliciously shut down something that people are enjoying, but rather that system was already very complicated and difficult to set up and difficult to explain to people. And I'm sure a very, very small number of people actually were able to use it because of that complexity. So I think this is a situation where they said, we need to kind of simplify all of this in order to implement our new system that will work across multiple platforms and will generally benefit a lot more people. And in so doing, we're going to have to sacrifice this, very appreciated thing that a fairly small number of people were able to take advantage of. And that's just how technology proceeds over time.
I mean, I don't know, how much, in terms of the streamlining, but how essential that part of it is. Maybe it's just very, very, to separate the two out would just have been too costly for the, the amount of impact that it was likely to make. But it just seems to me like, generally speaking, you'd want to leave things intact for people, that if they've been doing it a certain way, you'd want to leave it intact. And then if on Switch 2, it's a new system, it works differently, people will be more willing to accept that, right? That is this new system has different ways of working. I'm sure for Nintendo, there's some upside in the fact that, there was obviously people that used it the way that was intended. I would imagine there was probably quite a number of people that used it in a way that it was not intended, and some advantage was taken, and they probably, are pleased enough to kind of close that off. But it just seems to be like, the idea of kind of forcing it on, your kind of Switch 1 users, when, people have been doing it that way for a large number of years in some cases, or maybe some people, have only just kind of come to the Switch ecosystem, but they've kind of got used to it that way and they wouldn't be looking to upgrade for a long time. It just, it seems a little bit like, to me, there's a desire there to have, parity in the sense that it's just like, well, look, Switch 2 is just going to be, any way you look at it, Switch 2 is kind of better, right? It's more functional. And the other part that they're going to be pushing with Switch 2 is all this game share type of stuff, right? And the game chat type of stuff where it's like, oh, well, if you want to kind of bring, for instance, the game share, does let people play certain games, with one copy of the game, right? So, that is somewhat substituting but in a much narrower way, presumably, because at this stage, there's only a handful of Switch 1 games that are confirmed to have game share. They've already talked about the fact that it's not particularly suitable for games that are more, sort of, stressing the quick twitch factor, that tight synchronicity. Like it's maybe not so hot for that, with that kind of streaming sync that's going on. So it's certainly not a perfect, substitute in that regard, for that kind of thing. And I guess it's all these kinds of things added together. I feel like that are not just, the headline price increases is one thing. And, a lot of that we've talked about plenty of times is just the realities of inflation and, again, setting benchmarks for a generation that may last well into the next decade. But when you have all these other things together, I think it definitely, is not helping the perception of their general approach at this point. But, that may somewhat evolve once we actually get, into it and people get to actually experience some of these features and see, how much added value they provide. I mean, it's kind of, Gon was talking about those AR games and stuff. And I think that's some of the reason why maybe Nintendo, overpriced the 3DS is that they felt like those games had more value than people did when they played them. It was not some sort of word of mouth of like, you got to buy this to play the AR games and all that.
Right. I mean, we can say that Face Raiders was free for 3DS, but maybe the cost of Face Raiders was just sort of baked into that high price that the system launched with. And once they realized that people actually didn't care much about Face Raiders and many other things on 3DS, they realized, oh yeah, actually we need to slash this price as deeply as we possibly can right now. And
eventually just, having the non-stereoscopic model, obviously the 2DS comes along in time for like Pokemon and stuff. So, that's where you get to when you kind of the rubber meets the road, and it's like, how much do people actually, get out of these things? I mean, you could kind of link it back to the game chat thing. And again, it's like, you mentioned it, Johnny, in terms of like the ability to, streamline that process, maybe from a memory point of view at some point. I mean, I'm guessing, if they find that it's not as widely used or prioritized as they hoped, then the desire, and the priority attached to streamlining that process and making more memory and performance available to games may well increase, and they'll make sure that's the thing. None of this stuff, nobody knows until it's out there and people are actually, using it, not just in a demo kind of scenario, but, day to day, in their lives, and obviously nowadays they've got enormous amounts of data, to draw those conclusions about what's going on. And then they're going to adjust accordingly, from that point. But yeah, for now, I think that's going to do it for today's show. And obviously there'll be many, many more occasions for us to pick up these discussions about Switch 2 as it gets going next week. Johnny, thank you very much for joining us on this occasion and helping us address some of these topics.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And, I hope I can come back soon and actually talk about Switch 2 games. I'm very eager to get my hands on them.
Hell yeah.
No, I certainly hope so too. Like I said, for me personally, anyway, 2 years entirely too long since the last time we were able to talk about some Switch games back then. Like I said, Tears of the Kingdom was about to come out. 2 weeks entirely too long between conversations between you and I, Guillaume, as well. And of course, we eagerly await the return of John and James. Hopefully. Not before long, and we'll be getting down to all this stuff with the launch. Like I said, I could have it by the time we record next week, but I'm not gonna. I'm not making any bets on that. But for now, we're gonna leave you with some indie music, and I was inspired by the fact I was thinking about the fact that the last time that we recorded was when Tears of the Kingdom was about to come out, and we've used some music from Tears of the Kingdom, but it feels appropriate because as a kind of hardly. I mean, it's 2 years old. It's hardly like the last major game on Switch in a very direct sense, but it certainly is one of the last major games, and it ties into the launch of the Switch with Breath of the Wild, and now, of course, we'll have the Switch 2 edition to kick off Switch 2, which, I'll be interested maybe. I had a few things left to do. I played it pretty thoroughly back, in 23, but, I'll probably be going back to it. And so, musically, what I'm going for, it's just encapsulate that sense of anticipation for a new console is actually something from the very end of Tears of the Kingdom. I won't go into too much detail, even though I'm sure pretty much everybody listening will have a very good idea. But I think the translation of the Japanese for the track is "to her hand," and it is. I think it pretty much sums up. It's going to sum up people's fevered anticipation of finally getting their hands on new Nintendo hardware for the first time in several years, and how cathartic it's going to be to actually grasp it at the end of it. And so with that, thanks again to everybody, and we'll speak to you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.